Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the first podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Claire Armstrong, a Toronto actor you may have seen on the stage in recent productions of Miss Julie and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, or on your screens in the YouTube series Running with Violet or CBS's Alias Grace. She made her feature debut earlier this year in Daniel Worth's terrific Dim the Fluorescents, which won the Audience Award at the Slamdance Film Festival and finally opens in Toronto this Friday, December 8th, at the Carlton Cinema. Claire picked Never Let Me Go, Mark Romanek's eerie rendering of the deeply unsettling novel by Kazuo Ishiguro, set in an alternate England where three young friends spend their lives, their entire lives, in the service of a purpose they will never fully understand. Carey Mulligan, Keira Knightley, and Andrew Garfield star alongside Charlotte Rampling, Sally Hawkins, and little wee versions of Domhnall Gleeson and Andrea Riseborough, and the result is one of the calmest, quietest, saddest science fiction films you'll ever encounter. And I will say no more. Well, we will. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I saw the movie, I guess when it first came out, which was a while ago now, like 7 or 8 years ago now, maybe.
Fall 2009, I would say, or 2010?
Yeah.
10.
And I'm an emotional sucker in most ways, but this movie just like really hit me emotionally, and I have seen it several times since then, and every time I watch it, I think I've seen this movie before. It's gonna be fine, but I get gutted emotionally every time I watch it. It's just a beautiful story, and I also feel like the cinematography for me is a huge part of it, and it's one of the instances where like I can feel the cinematography working in a way, and so that I feel like is something sort of special about the movie. There are only maybe one or two other movies where I've ever really felt it that clearly, other than if it's a movie that is distinctly crafted around the cinematography. But I feel like this movie is sort of subtly, or sort of the cinematography is very, very subtle, I find. But
yeah, when I first saw it, I thought I'd been misinformed, because I thought it was a Mark Romanek film, and it is. He made it, but nothing he has done before or since has any indication that he could do this.
Yeah, and I think, with books that are based on movies, with movies that are based on books, I know there's always a mourning period for the people who have read the book, where they say, oh, the movie just never matches up. The movie never really, portrays the book the way that it's supposed to, or there's just so much in a book usually that you can't quite fit it all in a film. Yeah. But I find, I've read the book as well, and I find this movie does a great job of delivering the tone and the story of the book. It's just, there are a lot of shots in the movie that are so simple, a lot of shots of nature, like just still shots of a leaf and the water falling, like rain falling on a leaf. And I have had the thought, when I watched the movie, I've had the thought so many times of how beautiful the world, this earth is, and how lucky we are to be on it. And that, I think, is so contrasted in the film with them discovering how little time they will have on the earth. Yeah.
And how, to my mind, it was the sense of the price that's being paid for this.
Yeah.
Because, and this is the thing that no one knew. People who read the book knew about it, but it was really hard discussing it with people at TIFF that year, because they didn't know that it's
the twist.
It's essentially, and it's right up front. There's no real, it tells you what kind of movie it's going to be. It's a science fiction film with no science fiction in it.
Yeah.
Just like in the 1950s, this thing was achieved, and now here we are. And that's it. That's the world you see.
I know, it's incredible, because whenever I try to describe the movie to someone, I the only word I can think of really is clones. But that, you're right. It's not. There's nothing science fiction about it, even though it is about people who are bred as copies. Yeah. But because the film focuses so much on like the emotional and psychological trauma that they undergo from learning what their lives will be and how short their lives will be, I think that is a part that, for me, is what I love so much about the movie. It doesn't really ever explain how it works.
We don't really know what they know.
We don't know how they were grown or where, you don't see any of the science of it. We just feel how disappointing it is for them. And the strange thing also is that they don't try to fight it. Like, nobody tries to run, or, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, there's an attempt at an exemption. That's basically it. That people try to use bureaucracy to get out of
you can try to push it off for a few more years,
Yeah, it's this fascinating. Watching it again just recently for this is when I found a whole other layer, because I was no longer picking apart the mystery, I think, and now I'm a little older, and it's not that much of a gap. I was 42 when I saw it, and I'm 48 now, but that's a shift.
Yeah,
and I started to think that this is a film about, in a lot of ways, it has room for faith, and the idea that faith is a terrible thing, that it's crippling these people and keeping them, in service to the system, because all they know is what they've been told.
Yes.
From the earliest age, they've been told not to want to know more. Mm-hmm. This is how it is. And it's clear that it's not for everyone. It's not that way for most of the people they interact with. But the early scenes with Charlotte Rampling and with Sally Hawkins are just they're so sad and so fraught without ever fully explaining themselves. You need to either have read the book or be seeing the film again to understand what it is.
Understand, why there's such sadness, and like you said, it's so fraught, and the scene in the classroom when she decides that she's going to tell them the truth. It's heartbreaking, and it's kind of incredible that they haven't been told yet. Mm-hmm. That the older students don't tell the younger students. It's like a rite of passage, I guess, that you, like, if she hadn't revealed the secret to them, the teacher, at that point, when would they have found out?
Yeah. And would they even understand it? Because they don't. They don't all, anyway. Some of them embrace it. Some of them decide that it's going to be the thing that defines them. And they're going to be the best at it than anyone else, which is so...
Yeah, good donor. Being a good donor.
The idea of doing your best means literally giving yourself up, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. And to have that introduced when they're still young, when they're still kids, is just... When I was 8 years old, I have no idea what I would have comprehended. I thought Star Trek was a documentary. I had no idea that these things were happening and that there was a world beyond my own immediate circle, and if this is your normal, it's normal for everybody. Nobody knows they're living in a bizarre situation. That's just what's there.
It's incredible, like you said, the underlying sense of faith, I think, that's in the movie, and that was a big thing that struck me as well. Like, especially, there's this pivotal scene in the movie, which is always like the gut wrencher, where they're at the end. Carey Mulligan and Andrew Garfield are driving back, and he asks her to pull over on the road, and he gets out of the car and just like screams at the sky, and it's so... To me, I always felt like he was screaming at God, or whatever he thought was supposed to be up there, that obviously wasn't going to help him, and it's so sad to think how small we are. That's a thing about the movie that always struck me, that was how small human beings are, and how we have put so much work into extending our lives, far past what the generations before us lived to. Mm-hmm. And I think we are sort of hoping to live forever, or not even forever per se, but it's interesting because someone once, I don't know who it was, a friend of mine at one point said, that disease is nature's way of regulating population, in a way, is how he saw it. And he said, like, we're not actually meant to eradicate cancer, or maybe we're meant to fight it forever, but it's, there will be another illness or another plight that will befall us, because that's what that's how it works.
Right.
You know, so we have to die of something is the idea in a way. And it's sort of like we're trying, of course, tragedy is another thing, you know, when someone dies very young or suffers a lot. But it's interesting that we as human beings are going so far to eradicate our, you know, our fragility, our mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder sometimes, like, what, how far will we be able to go?
Right. Well, this movie certainly thinks we'll go pretty... the thing that's never spoken in the film is the cost of starting this program in the very first place, that you've decided that you're going to breed human beings for nothing more than death. That's why they're there. They're there to be harvested. And
the people who sort of who pay for a copy of themselves to be created for their own purposes. You know, it's like I am creating a copy that will be my personal donor, essentially.
Yeah. And it's an idea that isn't new. I mean, there are other movies that are about this very same thing.
Yeah.
They're just not as good because they disappear into the science fiction or the action or what happens if. And I think the most disturbing aspect of this film is that this is the movie where the system works.
Yes.
And, you know, what if they don't rebel? What if it all goes exactly as planned? How would you modulate the emotions of the donors in order that they don't revolt? And the answer is you just keep them... You treat them like sheep. You keep them content. You limit their exposure to the outside. It's a form of factory farming in a really awful way. Yeah.
It's incredible how they make them feel as if they are special as well. Mm-hmm. The whole time that they're living at the, you know, quote unquote orphanage or the boarding school, they tell them to make sure they keep themselves safe and no smoking, and, you know, always treat yourself with the utmost care because you are special. You know, it's incredible.
It's not the worst way to encourage physical fitness, but the ulterior motive is just so awful.
Yeah.
And again, that this would be in England, presumably around the Thatcher era, as we catch up to them in the 80s or in the 70s, right? We follow them into the 90s.
Yeah, I think it's the idea that, like, in 1970 they figured out how to.
Yeah. Oh, it's been underway since the 50s, according to the super at the beginning, which is so strange.
Yes.
So the program has been in place for 20 years. We're at the point now where all the uprisings have been quashed, and clearly anybody who's still objecting to it is no longer in power.
Yeah, the system just works now. It like runs like a machine.
Yeah.
And you know, it's true. What I love most about the movie, which anytime I tell someone about the movie, I always have trouble explaining it. You know, it's like it's a movie about people who are made as clones, but it's oldie timey.
Yeah.
You know, is what I always find myself saying, because the movie is set in the past. Mm-hmm. It's in the past, but it is the future in a way.
Yeah.
And the movie has I find that the cinematography has this sort of yellow wash over everything. Everything looks a little bit sort of faded, and even sort of just like beautifully soft in a way, you know, and the colors are all a little bit more yellowy, and there's just I can't get over every time I see it, I feel like there's a big concentration on nature and sort of the natural beauties of being a human being on the earth,
right,
which I feel is contrasted so well with the complete lack of respect for nature, you know, for what is naturally meant to be, that we are meant to die.
Yeah.
We aren't meant to live that long, to outlive our bodies shutting down.
Yeah, and these characters aren't meant to live at all. I mean, they have been created. They don't... I mean, calling it an orphanage is genius because they don't have mothers or fathers.
No.
They're simply there.
They have no origin.
Yeah, and they don't... I mean, those scenes of appreciating nature are... I think about Frankenstein. I think about, you know, the abominations... being able to consider beauty in that moment and being freed from whatever existence they have. But it just makes it so sad. It just weighs down on you.
Yeah, and it's they have such a great range of portrayals of how it manifests, right? That Carey Mulligan's character is so gentle and sort of... she kind of submits herself to it very early in, I think, you know?
Her function will be to support the others when they're frightened, which is just, again, unimaginable.
Keira Knightley's character is so... you can tell that she sort of rages at the universe, but she doesn't really understand how to deal with those feelings, right? So she takes it out on other people. And Andrew Garfield's character is just like, he's so angry, I think he's so angry at God or at whatever it is that was supposed to be out there.
But he plays it with that weird softness of a well-mannered child. Like that he's never really gotten out of that mentality, that he's grappling with these feelings that he doesn't fully understand and trying to filter them through what I guess you could describe as, Britishness. Like, mustn't grumble, mustn't complain, do your thing.
Yeah.
Stiff upper lip. And it's
Stay
just,
proper.
It's so horrible to watch these people who, there's nothing wrong with them. They're educated to a point. They're fit. They're all movie stars.
They have all the cognitive abilities that
they would be fine outside.
Yeah, absolutely.
And watching the film the first time through and coming to that realization and then understanding that they're never going to have a chance to even explore that potential.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't. You couldn't. That's the whole point, right? Somewhere away from here, there is English society, but they'll never get there. The closest they get is a seaside town and a fun
They live in the cottages. And
it's all so controlled.
It also, I guess, that in fact, the originals don't necessarily. I wonder if I don't know if it's ever explained in the movie whether the originals know that copies were made of them.
I assume if they do, they try very hard not to think about it.
Yeah,
but also
because I don't think you necessarily create. At first I thought that you create a copy of yourself, but they may just make copies of whoever.
Yeah, or I thought of it like a trust fund. Like if you're wealthy enough, your family can buy you one. Or you choose to. We have no idea how old the real versions are. Right. I assume they're older, because that's the thing that always comes back in these movies, but that's just an assumption too. What if they are just cells that were activated simultaneously just in case? That's financially not feasible.
Yeah.
But who knows? There's so much about this world that we don't understand, and then by putting us in that position, we're in their positions because they don't understand. We understand a little bit more because we have a larger frame of reference.
Right.
And they're just in it.
It's incredible because there are so many pieces like this now, and between so much sci-fi as well, but even things like Black Mirror, right, which are I find watching Black Mirror to be so fascinating in the newer seasons, because the older seasons came out long enough ago that there was a whole slew of concepts available to say, wouldn't it be crazy if this happened? And now a lot of those things have happened.
Yes, we're running out of ideas.
And so now it's incredible, like the places that you can go to say, doesn't it freak you out to think about this happening? And it's the same with Never Let Me Go, that we are nearly there. The idea of morality and what we are morally entitled to extend our own lives, and if it would mean creating a double of someone, or building a human being from cells in a petri dish, right? Do they have a soul? If they haven't been conceived and carried in a womb, or or if they've just been created without any intention of anyone of them having their own life and their own dreams and goals. It's just like the concept is really frightening if you think about the things that we can already do with science.
Sure. Yeah. And I was about to say that, there's always the chance that in the name of good business, someone will come up with this thing like the 6th Day, where you start by cloning pets and then get on to people without telling anybody. But I think the one good advantage is that the only administration, at least in the U.S., would be hamstrung by those very questions, the philosophical, religious questions, because the religious right would just lose their minds if someone started trying to do this. Print up souls without
the concept in a way is completely incomprehensible that it would ever actually work,
right? Because
there are so many moral questions,
Yeah, but on the other hand, the first time you find out you need a new kidney, it all goes on the table, right? Anyone would be willing to
And it's incredible
almost
because
anything.
we've begun doing these sorts of things in portions, right? We've begun being able to grow bone marrow, and maybe one day we'll be able to grow an entire spleen or grow a new pair of lungs, human lungs, and all the organs. So then the next step is like, well, why not just grow a full person?
Yeah.
And then just cut out, just that way you have a whole body to work from if you want, and you've got eyes and you've got, but that's the incredible thing. Like, at what point does it become a person as opposed to just growing parts in a dish?
Especially if you have to do it, in real time. If you have to have a zygote to an embryo to a fetus to a child.
Yes.
You have to feed them. You have to clothe them. I guess you could just let them wander around, but
You have to put them somewhere, and teach them about, I guess, morality and
at
ethics.
least as far as it applies to what you want them to do. But that's what's so fascinating about it being an English story. And that, I think, you could probably... Ishiguro could have probably gotten away with it in Japan too, because there's so much respect and structure and all of that is there. But making it an English story is so weirdly specific.
It's incredible that he chose to write it about England, because that's not a culture that the writer was born in.
Yeah, it's nobody's milieu. It's not Romanek's. It's not his.
No, it's incredible.
But it is right. Like, it's the right answer. It's where it would have to be, because...
I think so. Yeah.
Especially in the 50s, after World War II, where everybody just, did whatever the government said they had to do.
Yeah.
Still rationing going on. You know what it's like to live without.
And you know how easy I know what it's like to live without, and how easy it is for life to be discarded.
Yeah.
How sort of the fleeting nature of our existence, and the idea that so many people died in the war that we have to figure out a way to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. It's funny because the movie, to me, isn't even really scary. It doesn't really, to me, it's not like, it doesn't sort of make me frightened or existentially worried the way that things like Black Mirror do. When I watch things like Black Mirror, I think, my God, that really freaks me out. That might happen one day pretty soon. But there's something about this movie that is not really focused on, like, sort of because we see so little of the people who are, in a quote unquote responsible.
Right.
The people that benefit.
Yeah, we're working at a sub-level.
Yeah, exactly. We almost never see anybody who is outside of their world, right? All we see is them. And so we become so invested in them that the movie, I think, does such a great job of, bringing us inside their hopes and dreams and the complexity of their relationships. And in a way, it doesn't even really matter what is going on outside of their world.
Yeah, certainly not as far as this story is concerned.
Yeah.
And it just forces us to pay more attention to the performers, to the characters they're creating.
Yeah.
And Carey Mulligan, there was that window where she could do no wrong. When I interviewed Romanek before TIFF in 2010, he said that the instruction came from, like, they didn't know who to cast, and the instruction came from someone who had seen An Education at Sundance and just sent him a forward email that said, "Hire the genius Mulligan." And that's that's how she got the role. And Garfield was everywhere and nowhere. Like, he was ubiquitous, but nobody really knew who he was in a strange way.
He hadn't done Social Network yet.
It was the same,
right?
Yeah, it was released the same year.
Yeah, exactly. So no one had really seen it yet.
And Boy A was sufficiently small, I think.
Boy A is an excellent movie.
And the only time my Peter Mullen rule does not apply, which is that when Peter Mullen appears in a film, things are about to go very badly for people.
Yes, Peter. I know he has often played like ruthless and sort of really menacing characters.
That's his thing.
But he's so gentle and wonderful in that film.
Yeah, I keep pushing it on people just to explain.
Yeah.
You don't understand. He's a sweetheart.
Yeah.
He made the Magdalene sisters. He cares.
Oh, he's great. Yeah. And Andrew Garfield has this incredible capacity to, I think that, I would say that he, to me, is one of the most skilled actors of my generation in terms of, like, the subtleties of playing different characters. I mean, in a way, he is always recognizable because he's, his frame is very distinct. He's tall and,
insists on having that hair. going on.
The hair, yeah.
Hair.
But I saw Hacksaw Ridge just a few weeks ago, and from that to, like Superman, or Spider-Man rather, to Social Network. Like, in Social Network, it was incredible. He played a real person who spoke with an American dialect, but with a slight Hispanic lilt.
Yeah.
Because his character had a Hispanic background. So I think he's very gifted.
Yeah, his accent language is remarkable. Well, the whole deal with him is he was born in the U.S. and went to the U.K., and so he can fall into either one.
He's sort of like unidialectical, whatever you want to call it.
He's like a Canadian. We're stealthy.
He's like Gillian Anderson, right? She's
that's true. She can turn it on and off.
Yeah, she can do British and American.
Yeah. And she makes this, he makes a strange choice in Silence to speak English with an accent because the characters are Portuguese.
Yeah.
And everybody does it except for Kieran Hines, who just doesn't bother with it.
Yes.
But he and Adam Driver both have this slightly affected pronunciation, which is ultimately unnecessary and kind of showy and distracting for 2 minutes, and then you just fall into it because it's the 17th century and people are different. It's just that simple. He sells it through simple lack of affect.
Right.
But you look at Never Let Me Go, and he's effortlessly doing the thing that movie needs him to do as well, which is not steal focus.
Yeah.
And let Keira Knightley be bigger and show you how he responds to Mulligan's work with him. It's the performance that gets no sizzle, right? Because he's just doing the job.
He's just so like sweet and loving and endearing, Yeah. Keira Knightley I really enjoy in this movie too. And I haven't liked a lot of her performances, to be honest. I find she's often miscast or something. I don't know. I always have trouble with her. I find that there's a kind of actor that sometimes always appears to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can see that.
And who knows? I'm sure that's not actually true, but there's a sense of like a feeling of a lack of comfort in their own body or skin, or sort of a strange awkwardness. And I've often felt that with Keira Knightley. I just can't ever let go of watching the actor with her. And in this movie, I really did. Like, it didn't feel like it was an actor.
Yeah, I wonder if that's the world. I mean, it's just she doesn't make a lot of films that are set in England. In her,
that's true. She's often cast in North American, films that often she has to use a North American accent for,
or she has to be British in a fake way, like in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Yes,
that just are tethered to nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And, she's somebody who fascinates me because you could sort of watch her spend 5 or 6 years as an actor trying to wrest back her own impulses after the Pirates films, because Bruckheimer told her to keep her mouth open, and that sort of ginked everything she did for the next few years. She looks like a mouth breather.
Yeah,
it's just the set of her upper jaw is quite wide.
Right,
and so when she smiles, it's amazing. But when she closes her mouth and tries to look very serious, her face turns into a triangle.
Right.
And they didn't like that aesthetically, so they went with something else. And she spent like almost a decade trying not to do it.
Trying to change her face.
Yeah. And actively undermining her own work, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, even on the poster. And
That's incredible. I didn't know that.
She's the only one who gets a full-on face, and she's the one on the spine of the disc because she was the biggest name at the time. But if you're going to see the Keira Knightley movie, you're going to be very confused.
Yeah, exactly, because it's really the Carey Mulligan and Andrew Garfield show.
And the script, and like it's so much a film about the text, about what is happening and what isn't being said and what people do and don't know. You lean into it in a way that maybe you don't lean into in many other films at that time anyway.
Yeah, you're right. The text is really there, especially at the end, the way that Charlotte Rampling's character talks about what, she explains to them what they are in a way, and sort of like Charlotte Rampling's character's lack of ability to connect with them, her decision to never really consider that they were people with souls. It was the only way it was sort of the only way to be able to get through it, was just to see them as like vessels.
Yeah, which is again incredibly disturbing. Doesn't cost a cent.
Yeah.
It's all conceptual and has echoes with, Nazism and eugenics and everything else in human
1984.
history. And by the time we get to that scene, it's just like, well, of course you would. That's a completely rational way to act in this society.
Yeah. It's interesting too. One thing that has nothing to do with really the actual artistic side of the film at all, but I've begun to really enjoy noticing sets that have been used in other movies.
Oh yeah.
And there's a set used in this one that is used very prominently in Downton Abbey as well.
Which one?
The cottages.
Okay.
The cottage that they live in Never Let Me Go is also the cottage where Mr. Mason, Daisy's father-in-law, lives. And I remember one day thinking I think that's the same cottage, and then getting out Never Let Me Go and putting it in the DVD player and going back and forth from one to the other. And it's so neat to think of how many movies must have been shot on those sets. And how easy it is to transform it and make it look almost unrecognizable, other than there's one aspect there on the front of it. There's a series of windows that I just for some reason recognized right away.
Right. There was a set that I recognized by an archway once. It's completely unrecognizable. Otherwise, it was different decades or something, but it was definitely that archway. Yeah. And then you track back. It's like, yep, there it is, there it is, there it is, there it is. And even that is a sort of economy, isn't it, in the filmmaking, just use an existing location, because we know what it needs to telegraph. We know what feeling it needs to show people. Yeah. Get into their heads.
The score is also stunning for this film. Rachel Portman wrote it. Yeah. And I know a little bit of her stuff, a little bit of her other stuff, but I bought on iTunes the whole score for this, and it's just so heartbreaking. The melody and it's mostly strings in a way, right?
Yeah. It reminded me strangely of we were talking earlier about Cronenberg's Crash, but it reminded me a lot of the Howard Shore stuff from the 80s, like The Fly and Dead Ringers, where it's just so sad, but it's still supporting action.
Yes.
If you listen to it separately, you really hear just how, in Never Let Me Go's case, it's trying not to be sad in a weird way, sort of an austerity.
Sort of trying to pick itself up and keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. The score is, for me, such an enormous part of any movie, right? I mean, I suppose it must be for all of us, but often I almost find it impossible to separate the movie from the score, to separate my emotional response to a movie from my emotional response to the score. We watched Dim the Fluorescents for the first time at the screening at the Royal on the 3rd.
I had watched it the day before.
Did you?
Rounded the corner and saw the marquee and went, oh, God damn it. I could have seen it in the theater.
Yeah. And it was my first time seeing the movie. I had seen a few clips, but Daniel had convinced me to wait to watch the whole thing so I could see it on the big screen, and it was very much worth it. But I hadn't heard any of Miles's composition, and it was incredible, how it changed and sort of amped up and transformed the tone of the film. It's the music is so evocative, and I think it really has the power to kind of make or break a movie.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah,
and we've all seen films where the music is trying too hard.
Yeah.
Or not hard enough.
It's distracting, or it's just
support.
And it's a big sort of guide on how sort of helping the viewers know how they should feel in a way. It's it's sort of leading you towards the feeling that maybe the composer and the director and the screenwriters and everything is wanting you to feel.
Yeah. We've all seen films where they tried to fix something with music.
Yeah.
You can always tell. You can always tell.
One of the ones that I always felt the most I felt that sense about, that they were trying to really fix it and amp it up with music, was Pearl Harbor. The Pearl Harbor movie. That was that Howard Shore?
Michael Bay. I'm thinking Hans Zimmer, probably.
It was Hans Zimmer. And that score is so beautiful, I think. It's gorgeous. It's so sad and evocative. But it's there was something about that, for me, that clashed with it, because the movie wasn't that great, and the actors were a little bit sort of cheesy and schmaltzy, and the script was a bit cheesy and schmaltzy, and then you've got this beautiful score that is just like, it was too epic for the sort of cheese level. I mean, the movie was a soap opera in a way, right? It was a love triangle.
The music is kind of reaching for emotion that the film doesn't feel.
Yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
even understand.
Yeah.
Because it's, time to blow some stuff up. That's what
exactly. Time to blow some stuff up, and then, like, watch these beautiful people all sort of fall all over themselves for each other. But in Never Let Me Go, there's something so incredible about the score, because there is almost so little emotion in the, like, sort of leaked out by the actors. And, there are distinct times when you see, like, the weight of what they're dealing with, and the weight of the finality of their lives, and the lack of ability they will have to shape their own lives. But it's so few and far between. Andrew Garfield has that one moment on the road, and Carey Mulligan only has maybe like 2 moments, 1 or 2, in the woods. They've got that conversation where she realizes that she perceives that he may be saying that they could, that they could go and request for a deferral together.
Yeah, that there might be a way out.
Yeah. And you see how her heart is breaking there, and how badly she always sort of wanted him to choose her. And then at the end of the movie, to me, is like one of the most well-written passages. And I think that one's pulled directly from the book.
I believe so. Yeah.
And I've almost I almost have it memorized. It's almost just because I love the scene so much that it's so hard to forget those words, that the images that are called up are not, not sort of schmaltzy or precious or too earnest. Like one of the phrases that she says is, he has died by that point. And she says that, I've been given my notice now. My first donation is in a month's time. And then there's this one phrase where she says, I come here and I imagine that this is the place where everything I've lost since my childhood is washed up. And she's looking out at like this big field where they used to live, and she says, I imagine that if I waited long enough, a tiny figure would appear on the horizon, and I would know that it was him. And she says, he would wave and maybe call. And then she says, I only let it go that far. And it's just like, it's incredible, because you're there's even a restraint in like what she's allowed to dream of.
Yeah, it's like a child's drawing on a refrigerator. It's so simple, and
it's like she would see him and he would raise his arm up and maybe call out to her. But that's all that she has ever, they've never been allowed to really dream bigger than that,
Yeah, yeah. It is, again, it's artful in a way that requires you to be following it along. Like if you haven't been paying attention, you're going to think that's just a bland, dull, what is the point of that?
You're going to think that the movie is just sort of like written, or you might think that it's, that there's something lost in the translation maybe. There's something about it that sounds almost like a slightly different version of the English that we would hear in, modern films.
Right. Or maybe it reflects her own limitations. The fact that she doesn't understand anything more profound because she's never been allowed to, which also makes it sad and stunted and limited. Either way, it has the same effect, which is just heartbreaking. Yeah.
The language is you're right, it's very simple. It's very sort of pared away. There isn't a lot of sort of flowery, or there isn't a lot of colloquialisms.
It's almost naive in a way.
It is, yeah. It's just a simplicity of language that, in the sense that they were schooled about the proper way to say things, and maybe never given the opportunity to move beyond that, right? So
God knows you wouldn't teach them history.
No.
Or literature. I mean, nothing that might be halfway subversive. You'd have to isolate them from almost everything.
Yeah, you don't want them to develop their own way of expressing themselves, right? Yeah, and I think that's a really beautiful pairing with the score, is that the language is so sort of simple, and it doesn't, it's not, Yeah, the language doesn't feel like syrupy in any way, or it's just very simply stating what the characters are feeling. But then the music of the score is so mournful that it sort of like undercuts it in a way that it just I think it's such a great movie.
Yeah, well, Romanek is feeling it for them. I mean, that's the film is doing that for them, and we get to participate.
Yeah.
Oh, now I'm sad again.
I
It's
know.
such an intense experience for something that is so placid on the surface.
It is.
Even the surgery aspects of it, of the stuff that could be science fiction, is just ugly and basic and
yeah. The scenes
just blood.
Yeah, they just take the organ out, and then they leave the body there because we'll clean that up later.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true, and the surgery rooms all look kind of like old and
Maybe
grimy.
that's part of it. This stuff's being performed in discarded hospitals.
It doesn't look futuristic at all.
Yeah, there's no sense of you're unlocated in time and in technology, and it's just those choices are. Again, you look at something like The Island, the Michael Bay film about clones, where there's one amazing image of Scarlett Johansson having escaped this body farm and coming face to face with an advertisement of her own face, which we're used to seeing. That's amazing. And I'm sure that was in the script and not a Bay's conception, or he's a commercial advertising director. He would go there anyway. But it's that one moment where you think, oh, there's a world. Like, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
This is the way this world works. And in Never Let Me Go, there's no gloss. There's almost no pulse. It's just this slow soft
burn.
Exhaustion.
Yeah.
Extinction of these characters.
Yeah,
and
there isn't even... You're right. There isn't even a sense of like, oh God, this is so tragic. Someone help these people. It's just, you feel that, but in a much more subdued sort of way that it's like a slow aching that eventually builds to a point where it just kind of bursts, and that's personified in a big way through Andrew Garfield's character. But that's, I think, also some of the really smart directing that and maybe, who knows if it was a combination of the director and the actors all crafting it together. It often is, but even then, I think it's the sign of a really smart director to choose to really keep those moments of emotional release few and far between. Yeah, because it's so, I mean, it's so much more powerful when it happens after such a long time of just sort of watching them exist.
Yeah. You can feel it building, and the level at which it is expressed isn't even powerful enough to justify it in a strange way. You're just that's what my takeaway was. You should be angrier. I'm waiting for Keira Knightley to actually rebel, because that's she's the manic pixie dream clone. She's the one who's there to point out that we could do stuff. We could run in the water. We could go to a restaurant.
Yeah, why aren't they smashing the windows at the cottages and tearing things up and trying to, tear their... Why are they trying to tear their bracelets off?
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Why isn't anyone trying to run?
Right.
And it's because, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And in a way, they were never trained or instructed in freedom of thought and freedom of, sort of freedom to dream.
Self-criticism and even rebellion. It's alien to them.
Yeah.
They're just there to be there.
Yeah, exactly. To get along.
Yeah. Until they're used.
Yeah.
Oh man, now I am bummed.
Oh, I am bummed.
Well, let's turn this around and ask the closer question, which is the one that is always the same on the show, and it is simply, what of this film have you borrowed or stolen or absorbed into your own DNA? Have you ever used this in your work? Has there been an opportunity?
From Never Let Me Go?
Yeah, or anything within it.
Absolutely. I think as an actor, I'm a pretty I'm a pretty emotionally outward actor. I mean, in basic terms, I always play the crier. I always, there's a lot of crying in Dim the Fluorescents. There's a lot of, and it's reduced. People often will ask, how do you do that? How do you cry so much? And it's not really that. I mean, it's more so, an emotional availability in a way that I've kind of practiced and worked at, through theater school and also just in my life. And also a part of it is just innately who I am. I'm a pretty emotional person, which also means that a lot of the time I cry in my daily life a lot, and
Okay.
But
So it's there for you.
Yeah, it's there for me, and I feel very fortunate that it's there and it's available to me to work with as an actor. But a big part of what I took from this movie was how little of it you actually need to communicate the depth of an emotional state of being, and how sometimes less is more. And I think, there's certainly nothing wrong with like going full tilt with an emotion, but sometimes we as human beings, we don't necessarily want to see the actor or see the character living it out, living out the emotion exactly, fully and in front of us. We sort of want to perceive that it's there and then feel it in our own way. Like, we don't necessarily need to be shown exactly what we're supposed to be feeling as the viewer. And I think that's been an important thing over the years for me to learn as an actor, that it's not show and tell in a way, I can only live the emotion in a way that feels honest to me, and the viewers, and I do a lot of theater, right? So it's often when it's live, you're trying to affect or send an energy out to the audience and sort of build a relationship with the audience. But all you can really do is live the emotion in a way that feels honest to you, and that's going to do whatever it's going to do to the audience, and you really have no control over how they're going to feel in relation to watching you feel something honestly.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I really witnessed in this movie, is like that I think it's portrayed in a way that's really emotionally honest.
This impossible emotion is still being felt somehow.
Yeah. And I think the less is more thing was so well done and well crafted in this movie. And, I suspect that it was probably the director and the actors working together to, and exploring how far you can go into the emotion. And it's sort of like, let's pull it back. Like, I know it's under there, but I want to see you try and cover it. I need to see you trying to cover it a bit more, and that's I think something that can often be really powerful in trying to convey a story, is the emotion is there, and then now put a cover on it and try to keep it in.
Yeah. Well, when the emotions come in Dim Fluorescents, they're explosive. They're just overwhelming, to the point where the first time I saw it, I was inclined to reject it. Just like, why are they doing that? That seems
too much.
And then you realize that that's the whole point, and it makes the last one even more powerful.
Yeah.
It's just two people just completely losing themselves in each other.
Yeah.
And out of desperation, and weirdly, the ending of Margaret came up because that's the same thing. People responding to the art that they're encountering with such force. Mm-hmm. And Naomi and I were talking about that yesterday, and it's just, it is a straight line, but it's so completely different. And the film is such a different experience that to find yourself back around to this point does speak to the universality of experience, right? Like, that's how people react at that moment.
Exactly.
I believed it completely.
Yeah, I think that a thing that I feel that I often think about especially with this movie, a reason why I love watching this movie so much, is that it made me realize in a big way the subtlety of acting on film, because I am a theater actor by origin, and I've done a lot of like Shakespeare and Chekhov and Arthur Miller, and big emotions on big stages, and needing to sort of communicate that through body language, and it's just a different kind of beast. And so it's helpful to remember that in film, the most subtle things can be portrayed and conveyed, easily in film, but also that big emotional moments, if they are honest, can totally work on film. It can make a lot of sense on film, because people, I think as viewers, we want to see people in extraordinary moments. We don't want to see a whole movie of it, but that's, I think, why we tell stories, and why we go to see and listen to stories, is to be able to live inside someone else's experience for a while in an extraordinary circumstance, And that doesn't have to mean, end of the world, and it just may mean an extraordinary, something that you may not experience every day. And being able to live that out through watching another person do it, I think, is part of what allows us to expand our human experience, right? And so when an actor really goes there, if you feel that they're going there really honestly, I often feel like, man, I'm so glad they did that, because it was witnessing something that I wouldn't necessarily see in daily life.
Yes, you got to be there for it in a weird way and have it captured.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's too much. I mean, sometimes, you can always tell like an overwrought performance.
Yeah.
But when a movie finds the tone and maintains it, Edgar Wright, I think, said once that the tone of Scott Pilgrim was everybody pulling on the rope with the same tension.
Oh, really?
And that was the same year as this, oddly enough. And I do feel that there's a similar thing. Like, you just have to be so precise.
Yes.
Or it'll slide out and everybody's going to get burned.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just becomes sort of a mess of like wanting to feel and show how you feel, and let's all feel together. Right. And I think that is often a pitfall that we can fall into as creators, as performers and writers, and the idea that like if you just go up there and feel the crap out of it, then that's gonna really get people. But you have to really understand. Yeah, exactly. You really got to choose your moments, and craft a landscape. Mm-hmm. And I think they do that really well in this movie.
Yeah, it's so sad. Okay, if you've been listening this long and you haven't seen it, go see it, please, because that's what we're here for.
Go see it. Go rent it.
My thanks to Claire Armstrong, who you can see in Dim the Fluorescents when it opens this Friday, December 8th at the Carlton Cinemas in Toronto. You should also dig into the podcast archives to find her co-star Naomi Skorna talking about Margaret, and their director Daniel Worth on Love Streams. Both of those episodes dropped earlier this year. And thanks also to Ingrid Hamilton. She knows what she did. Claire's not on Twitter, but you can follow her film at Dim Fluorescents, all one word, no the, and you can find Never Let Me Go on Blu-ray and DVD from 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play. And as always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you feel like leaving a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.